facing the same problem. The password is saying incorrect.
Okay. So can you
Sharing
please
his
send
number
it?
as well with
Yeah, share it with Shubham and I will speak to him.
yeah.
Can we upgrade Professor Abhay Khandkar as a speaker, please?
Ashmit is also facing the same problem. I'm sharing the number again.
Yeah, Shubham, I think the tech team needs to look at it. The password is giving problems to people in logging in. Can the technical team please look into it? I think there is an issue with the login part. People are facing an issue.
I've shared the number with Shubham, Ashmit's number.
Okay, fair enough. Professor Abhay Khandikar, would you like to speak once and just to test your audio and video? Amrita
Yeah,
here.
hello. Is it okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks.
Professor, hi, very good morning. This is Ashmit here. I'll be moderating the session.
Yeah, sure.
Great connecting with you, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Miss Mariwala. This is Ashmit here from CNBC TV 18.
Hi, Ashmit. Not able to see your video.
Yes, Ashmit, your video is coming as blank. I don't know, everyone's is coming. Even Paula is blank at this point. Let me just
You,
speak to the
Amrita, I
tech.
can see you.
Okay, yeah, you are there, but I can't see Ashmit. Let me just speak to the tech team once.
I've enabled the video from my end, so
Okay, just
not
let
quite sure.
me
Sure.
let me speak to the tech team. Can we have the speakers' views shown in the screen? That would be good. Ashmit, Professor Abhay Kandikar, Paula, Sunil. In the room, we can see. That would be good. Ashmit, you're coming as a blank thing. Let me just check what the issue is.
Yeah, I just checked again. I think I've enabled it from my end. I'll just check with the team once again. बच गए
So, Asmit and Amrita, I'll just take 1 minute of all of you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Anil Kumar Jain. I am the chair of IIGF 22. And I welcome all the participants who are in person present here at India Habitat Center, and also who are online. And with me, we have one of the speaker of the high-level panel, Sunil Abraham, with us. And I have two co-chair of IAGF 22 who are with me. We have Mr. T.V. Ramachandran, well-known person. He is the president of BIF. And we have Dr. Jayjeet Bhattacharya. He is president of CDAC, as well as he is also professor at IIT Delhi. Best of luck for the entire 3 days event of IAGF. Although we have a formal inaugural today at 5:30 at FICCI, I invite all of you to be physically present in that particular event. Now I hand over to Amrita to introduce the moderator, speakers, and then take the sessions ahead. Over to you, Amrita. Thank you.
Thank you, Anilji. Just to check with the uh, WebEx admin, is the video of all the speakers available? Yes, Ashmit, we can see your video now. Yes, I can see your tech team. Okay, great. So I guess let me start. Welcome everyone to the first high-level panel of the second edition of India Internet Governance Forum. This panel is about leveraging Techade for empowering Bharat. How do we do it right? And I have the privilege to introduce the moderator of this session, Ashmit Kumar, who is the Deputy Director of CNBC TV 18. Ashmit has been operating as a leading financial journalist for over a decade and has been recognized and profiled as one of India's top 40 journalists under 40 years of age. He is the deputy editor and is leading the reportage of CNBC TV 18 on all things such as tech, digital, and telecom. He also pilots the coverage of CNBC TV 18 on legal issues of national and international significance and has spent a large part of the last decade on understanding policy development, execution, and regulatory oversights, interfacing with government regulators, industry stakeholders, digital rights activists, and lawyers. So, Ashmit, over to you to take the panel ahead.
Right. Good morning to everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Amrita. You, I think, inadvertently bumped up my salary bracket by referring to me as a deputy director. I wish I'll keep my fingers crossed, but for now, yes, I'm operating as a deputy editor here at CNBC TV 18. It's a great honor as well as a pleasure to be moderating this distinguished panel of guests, and we'll hope that over the next 1 hour we'll benefit from their insight on what is very clearly a very interesting subject of discussion. The Prime Minister has very clearly defined this coming decade for us as India's decade, and the subject, of course, is quite in sync with that. Leveraging Techade for empowering Bharat. There's a very conscious call on not calling it India, but empowering Bharat. How do we do it right? That's the potent question that we're asking now. Just to give the context, we're looking at an explosion as far as digitization is concerned. That, of course, is a part of the government's Digital India mission. The government, various functionaries, entities, I beg your pardon, of the government are working hard towards realizing the Digital India aspirations. And in fact, just last evening, I was at a session where the Minister for Railways, Telecom and IT, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, was appearing. And as a part of that panel, he said that looking back at the last 7 years, we're standing at an inflection point. We're looking at an India stack which is second to none. We're looking at a situation where India, in many respects, is leading the curve. The payment ecosystem here in the country is again second to none. Is unique. India is pioneering efforts in that direction. He also talked about how the Jam Trinity is working together for extending benefits, for targeting very specific pockets of population that need the assistance from the state, and not just that. It is also, in fact, leveraging innovation, reaching out to pockets of rural India, enabling growth. There are very distinct directions that this digital drive, drive by the government is taking, which is towards e-health, which is also talking about digital commerce, which is talking about agri-tech. So it is only set to grow from here. One can be limited only by one's imagination. And that is the direction that the government says that, look, this is a big sandbox that we've provided for various stakeholders, and it is for the stakeholders to now drive the journey forward. And speaking of the stakeholders, let me now, in fact, cut across to the panelists, the very distinguished panelists who are joining us. First up, Professor Abhay Karandikar. He's the director at IIT Kanpur and former chairman of the TSDSI. He's been a former part-time member of the TRAI. He's the founding member and the former chairman of the TSDSI. A renowned academician, he's also a member of the High-Level Forum on 5G and chaired the 5G Spectrum Policy Task Force, awarded with IEEE SA Standards Medallion in December 2016. He has several patents to his name and contributions to IEEE and 3G PP standards. Professor Kandikar, thank you so much for joining us. Also with us is Miss Paula Mariwala. She's the founding partner at Aurelius Ventures. She's a physicist by training. That's quite interesting. She's also been a technologist. She wears many hats, also that of a businesswoman, of an investor, of a mentor, of a philanthropist. She's been active as an early stage investor. So many hats. She's been there as far as last 15 years are concerned. She looks at innovative companies which are looking to make impact, which are creating impact. She's also, amongst other things, passionate about education, gender equality. That, in fact, is one agenda that we're also seeking to drive here at CNBC TV 18, ensuring that there is more parity. That is not merely a tokenism that is required at this stage, but very concrete efforts which will see results as a part of sustainable growth trajectory. That's something that we're pushing at CNBC TV 18 as well. And in fact, is also one of the tracks that will be up for discussion as a part of the G20 presidency that India has taken over. She also, in fact, looks at entrepreneurship and uses technology for creating sustainable solutions which can improve quality of lives. Also with us, Mr. Sunil Abraham. He's the Public Policy Director, India for Data Governance and Emerging Technologies at Meta India since October of 2020. Now, under the emerging tech, Sunil also focuses on AI and how it can be leveraged for communities in the global south. Prior to joining Meta, he was endowed professor at Artes University of the Arts in Netherlands. Sunil also co-founded Mahiti Infotech 23 years back in Bangalore, which today continues to serve global civil society with a team of 40 engineers that specializes in free and open source software solution. Very interestingly, he also co-founded the Center for Internet and Society in 2008, which has offices in New Delhi and Bengaluru, and served as its executive director for the first 11 years. The center has also produced high-impact policy and academic research that spans areas like accessibility for the disabled, access to knowledge, openness, internet governance, telecom, and digital humanities. Sunil, very important to mention here as well that Sunil was elected as an Ashoka Fellow in 1999 to explore the democratic potential of the internet. So again, as I said at the very beginning, a very distinguished panel that will perhaps guide us over the next 60 minutes to give us a sense of direction as to what this India's Techade journey could mean for Bharat, and how do we get it right. That's the potent question we're posing. Let's first begin by opening comments. Professor Abhay Karandikar, if I may come to you, it's a very important question being asked. We're seeing that the government is supremely confident of the measures that have been done in the recent past and that continue to go ahead. You also were as a part of the 5G advisory panel. 5G is underway. It's been launched in 50 cities. That is designed to be the next big thing as far as telecom and communications are concerned. Just give us a sense as to what the journey ahead looks like in your view when we look at India's Techade for Bharat.
Thank you, Ashmit, and thank you all the participants who are there, sort of in person and also online. As I think you have rightly articulated in your opening remarks that digital connectivity is actually dominating our life today. In fact, after the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of digital connectivity has increased even more. And now the digital connectivity has almost become all pervasive. Whether, it is banking and finance, or retail, or manufacturing, transportation, health, agriculture, governance, defense, education. So they are all increasingly relying on now on the information and communications technology. In India, we have taken a tremendous steps in terms of penetration of digital connectivity through cellular mobile communications. And in fact, in a country like us, a cell phone has become a primary device for accessing the internet. And as you rightly mentioned, that in that context, therefore, the future generation mobile communications technology like 5G play an extremely important role in terms of influencing the quality of life as well. Now, while, as you mentioned that we have seen a remarkable improvement in areas such as digital payments and online bankings and financial inclusions and financial transactions. With the proliferations of the 5G and the various other attributes that the technology has, we are likely to see an even important benefits in terms of providing affordable healthcare, which is also an important aspect in terms of empowering the country. So we believe that with 5G, kind of a broadband technology, affordable healthcare and quality healthcare will become a reality, because as you know that in a country like India, where we have a significant population, scaling the healthcare in the traditional manner has its limitations, requires not only massive investments, but also is time consuming. And there is an opportunity for us to leverage the technology to provide a very state-of-the-art healthcare in the coming years or so. The other aspects which I will sort of briefly touch, while we will have a very wide landscape of several use cases in varieties of sectors. Increasingly now, the economic sovereignty and national sovereignty are going to be dictated by the ownership of these technologies. And in this context, it will really become important that we do not remain just an emerging market, but also become a major player in terms of developing and providing technologies in these important areas, which will almost become critical in terms of the strategic aspects of the country. So I think these are the two main things that I just wanted to mention in the openings, and then I will come back again when other panelists have spoken. So over to Ashmit.
Right, Professor, thank you so much for those initial inputs. Let's also take this conversation with Ms. Mariwala. Ms. Mariwala, the subject that we have, which is how the Techade can be leveraged for Bharat and how to get it right. Also give us a sense that as far as this India's Techade is concerned, we have a huge internet consumption that takes place in rural India as well. That figure is set to grow, not just rural India, but overall India is set to grow to 900 million by the year 2025. So give us a sense that in terms of one point that Professor had made, that look, digital healthcare is something that we can expect will grow by leaps and bounds thanks to this digital connect. Also, if we were to use that analogy, when we look at sectors such as banking, such as education, do you see that as perhaps something that can also revolutionize access to such public services in rural India when we talk about leveraging technology?
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor Karanika, for setting the stage, and thanks, Ashmit, for that great question. I just want to go back to when we first started my first venture fund in 2006, when data was so expensive and so rare that if there was a business model which counted use of data, then the numbers just shrunk. That okay, very small population has access, and hence there were models which used text sometimes rather than internet to deliver a service or transaction and so on. As we know, that has changed drastically. And some of the models which at that time took so long to scale, we had a company called Red Bus, which was a bus ticketing online, where we had to actually partner with kiosks or mobile recharge or pawn shops and put up little computers there for people to buy the bus tickets. And as we know, we don't need to do any of that now. So over the last decade plus, there's been a huge change in not only the penetration of the internet with the data, with smartphones, but also the way internet data is consumed, which has opened up phenomenal opportunities to deliver services across socioeconomic strata and across regions, giving last mile access to rural India as well. So this has thrown up very many interesting models. The healthcare example is one which is really at the top of mind right now because of 5G, where we require large bandwidth to really get our medical data across to doctors. Again, back in 2010, we had funded a company which had started chain of small hospitals in semi-rural India. And the idea was to have this kind of telemedicine network, but it did not do well at that time because we had to localize a lot of those services since the access was not that easy or inexpensive. Today, we are seeing a lot of a push by innovators to put up specific health-related business models around telemedicine, and also for impact investors who are partnering with people on the ground, whether they're not-for-profits or self-help groups, to provide services, to the rural India and just to give access. I mean, we have the pipe now, and it's only growing. It's only giving more bandwidth. So definitely, we are going to see a lot more investment going into what we are calling remote medicine of all kinds. It also involves taking right kind of data, which will enable us to have better health services, because a lot of the health services may not take in account the data of a particular demographic that may not have been well served. So I think data coming from these regions is another huge benefit that will help innovators come up with better solutions and access. I want to touch upon two more sectors. One is, as you pointed out, there is a sort of a digital divide in types of in the type of data that is consumed or type of services that are accessed. The e-commerce is largely still accessed by urban or upper middle class India or middle class to upper middle class India, though it's growing, it's percolating down quite a bit. We have very good logistics companies which are now reaching. I was in a small village in the Himalayas last weekend, a small village of Hartol of 600 people, and my host actually had a packet delivered to them. It's quite difficult to reach. It's about 10 hours drive from Delhi, and they just did put it on, ordered it on Amazon, and it was delivered. So we are seeing a whole layer of logistics along with last mile logistics. So where they partner with the post office, it was a postman who delivered it. So these are really innovative models which are coming up, and again expanding opportunities. The divide, though, between for example, with women uh, who have access but very limited consumption, it's still a bit of an issue. There's a bit of a digital divide. If you see the numbers in terms of female participation in the internet services and economy, and that's a huge opportunity that one can actually tap into to also bridge the gender divide across sectors. I'll just bring two examples here where how internet is being used so effectively, thanks again to the last mile infrastructure set up by the government in many of these places. There's one company that we'd funded back in 2012, which was giving rural access to rural consumers to various products. We started with energy products. Today, 8 years down, or 10 years down, we have a network of 25,000 women. We are called Sahelis. This happened right after demonetization around 2018-19. And they have been given smartphones. They have access to data thanks to the great data penetration we have now also in rural India. These are in rural Rajasthan, UP, and Bihar. We partnered with self-help groups, and they've been given apps in vernacular, and using those apps, they're generating income for themselves, also selling services, passing on services to various users, and they are empowered. And purely because they have the data in their hand, and they're able to really utilize and have a voice in the community as well. One more example is of another company called Karya, where they are actually giving, really bridging the digital divide by using rural, so again, partner with self-help groups, rural women as well as men, and helping them, giving an app, training them to tag data in vernacular for AI. So a lot of large companies need data tagging to be done in various languages. So they're using these people, and again, the data sanctity is maintained. The data will belong to the consumer, and they will get a royalty on the kind of data tagging that they have done. So huge amounts of opportunities, and we still need to work harder at bridging the digital divide, and making sure that all types of people and across India, we have the right use of technology. And there are entrepreneurs out there to really build on this great infrastructure. So I'll stop at that, and I can give some more examples along the way.
Thank you for that, Ms. Marimala. Mariwala, very interesting examples that you gave us, especially that of the logistics chain stretching all the way to Himachal, that small village that you were in. And it begs imagination as to how some of these larger stories then percolate down to the grassroots level. That's an interesting example that you've shared with us. With that, let's also hear from Mr. Sunil Abraham. Mr. Abraham, your opening comments on this very interesting conversation about just borrowing from the example that Ms. Mariwala had shared on taking the larger e-digital story and taking it at the grassroots level to Bharat, to rural India.
Thanks so much, Ashmit. There's a wee bit of echo. Should I just proceed, or that?
You are fine in the online space, actually.
That
Sunil.
mic is on. No. I think it's on, but mute. Sorry about that. Should I just? Okay, I think I'll just try and proceed through this. So India's philosophy when it comes to the Techade has two core components. The first, Ashmit, as you had mentioned in your opening comments, digital public infrastructure, projects like Aadhaar and UPI, the India stack, is a critical component of India's strategy. And the second is digital public goods. All these various pieces of digital public infrastructure has leveraged digital public goods like free and open source software and open standards and so on. And it is precisely there when it comes to digital public goods where the private sector, companies including my employer Meta, can play an important role as an ally in India's journey on the Techade. Meta's experience with open hardware began from the very beginning when our young founder was establishing Meta as a new company. He quickly realized that he wouldn't be able to afford the billing from cloud service providers. So Meta decided to build its own cloud infrastructure. And after it designed and built out its own cloud infrastructure, it published all the details of the project. And that's available still on the internet, and it is updated. It's a project called Open Compute. And if there are government departments or entrepreneurs in India and they want to build cloud infrastructure just like Meta has, then Open Compute is the place to look. Of course, the second piece and the second component of digital public goods, which is critical, is open source software. And there, Meta has had a long run producing open source software. If you look at our state of open source contributions, for just last year, I think we have contributed to more than 300 open source projects. And since Indic languages was mentioned previously on this panel, I want to point to one particularly exciting project, and that is No Language Left Behind 200. It is particularly exciting for us in India because it supports 25 Indic languages. As you know, Indic languages, like many other languages, are low resource languages. There isn't sufficient digital corpora or even parallel digital corpora. So the paradigm shift in terms of AI development is these are self-supervised AI models, and they're also multimodal. Translation can happen directly from voice to voice without necessarily having to go through intermediate steps like text and translating from the Indic language to English before you retranslate into the second Indic language. And the big open source project that this is all building towards is called the Universal Speech Translator. And there is a demo already available on the internet. And there they have selected a particularly complicated language without a standardized textual representation. And in India, we have examples of languages like this, Konkani, where there is a representation of Konkani in the Kannada script, in the Roman script, and also in Devanagari script. You can see through the demo, without going through the text layer, direct translation from Hokkien to English and from English back to Hokkien. And these are some very powerful technologies, very useful in a country like India. My vision is one day in the Indian Parliament, our parliamentarians will be able to debate each other in their mother tongues, and the translation will happen live using these similar open source projects. Open standards also critical to the way we are approaching building the metaverse. We don't want anybody to be trapped inside a metaverse made by one particular commercial vendor. We want people to travel freely across multiple metaverses, and we're part of global standards forums like OpenXR. And if you look at the latest piece of hardware that is in compliance with OpenXR, it also solves for regulatory challenges around data protection, because if you look at the API specification, you will have complete visibility into what kind of data is shared between Meta and the developer of some other app or experience within the metaverse. So open standards is not just inclusive and supports diversity, but it also helps with other pieces of the regulatory agenda. And then outside our core business, which is AI and emerging technology, We're also serving the world of open science generally. So there are two interesting projects I'd like to point you to. One is Open Catalyst, and there's a big open data set also available. This is for entrepreneurs that want to identify catalysts for carbon neutral fuels. And then ESM Metagenomic Atlas, which is an open source and open data project, which is mapping out the dark matter in the universe, the genomes that haven't been mapped yet through DNA mapping. So we are not just embracing openness for the core business, but also openness in the service of science in general. And during COVID, we had pledged our complete patent portfolio for anybody to use if they wanted to work on anti-COVID measures. And even today, all our patents that are connected to green technologies have been pledged for innovators and researchers to build follow-on technology. So this is the argument I'd like to make to establish that companies like Meta and any other company that embraces openness can become an ally in India's journey on the Techade, and especially Meta because we take some of these ethical principles very seriously. More recently, our flagship AI toolkit, PyTorch, we transferred the ownership of that toolkit to Linux Foundation. So this speaks to the technological sovereignty. If the Indian government were to use PyTorch and they don't want it to be governed by a single corporate entity, the future of that open source project, then they can be more reassured because they can join the Linux Foundation and then sort of guide the future of that open source project through that way. And then a lot of other people that use openness today, especially when it comes to the release of AI models, they're only open APIs. They're not really giving source code access. On the other hand, we not only give source code access, but also from a sustainability perspective, we give the trained model for download so that you don't have to burn the carbon training the model again. And here I'd like to talk about one collaboration with FICCI and NEGD. We are hoping to support 100 Indian open source developers to contribute to open source projects that are foundational to the metaverse. Of course, one obvious project comes to mind, which is Blender. Those of us who have watched the popular film RRR will know that, or may know that the special effects in that film has been created by Blender, by using Blender. And this is a sort of project that we are hoping Indian engineers will contribute to. It's a very different moment from the Y2K moment when I was growing up. I think that was the big sort of first Techade, perhaps in the 1990s, when we started off creating small Silicon Valleys. At that time, everybody dismissed Indian technologists and innovators and said, we are producing sort of non-glamorous grunt work. But today, if you look at the OECD policy repository and look at the contributions made by Indian engineers to public AI projects, 25% of the contributions last year were made by Indian engineers. So we are, in terms of human capacity, we are at a particularly fortunate moment, and we should build the Techade not just for India, but for the globe. That is my ambition.
Very interesting comments, and I think at least what you've mentioned in terms of partnerships that you have for open source developers with FICCI, with NEGD, efforts that you're making in terms of having more access to these Indic languages, which will of course make that journey easier for a large part of rural India. I think these are steps that one can imagine will assist that journey going forward. Professor, let me get you in on this subject. One very recent study said that as far as rural India going digital is concerned, there are two trends that will stand out. One you mentioned was, of course, health. There are two others that the study raised. One was e-governance, access to these public services, as well as agri-tech. Can you tell us from your perspective, when we look at this journey moving forward, which, according to you, will be the standout features of this digital journey that rural India should be prepared for?
Okay, so I think as I mentioned earlier, that health tech and of course you have pointed out agri tech are the two most important I think, components. But the point which was made earlier by Mariwala is, we have to first enable the infrastructure in terms of providing and all pervasive digital connectivity at an affordable price, which will make these services, both, agri-tech or health tech, universal and affordable. I think this is very, very critical because unless, in a country like India, we bridge the digital divide, and not only the digital divide in terms of geography, but also the point was made in terms of, the population segments, like, the women, the disadvantaged, and the other people who are not able to afford. We will not be able to have a universal coverage. And in a true sense, the fact that we would like to provide the services in these sectors. As far as the technology is concerned, I think, as I already mentioned, that with the cellular mobile communications now moving towards 5G or beyond 5G technologies, with the penetration of Internet of Things, with the penetrations of low latency applications becoming available, we would have the possibility of an India health stack and an India agri stack possible. And in fact, there is a possibility, there's a huge opportunity for developing an open stack for these applications, going forward. The underlying communications and information technology offers a huge opportunity to enter it into these areas. But of course, the bit pipes and also the affordable devices are going to play, another important role where we must pay some attention. As you know that even the government has taken several steps. We have several flagships program of the government which were initiated some time back, of providing digital connectivity to gram panchayats and rural areas in the form of BharatNet. And although the BharatNet coverage has increased extensively in the few years, but the full impact in terms of providing, the last mile high throughput broadband connectivity, which would really enable and which will really bring health and agri-tech to the doorsteps of a common rural populace. Still more needs to be done, but at the same time, I'm quite optimistic, because there lies also a huge opportunity for a lot of us to play an important role, both in terms of local entrepreneurs as well as the technology enablers. So I think while there are challenges, I do see a huge opportunity in that, given the size and expanse of the market that we have, and given the availability of the technology components that are going to be with us in the coming decade or so.
Very interesting point, Professor, that to actually take this digital journey forward, one needs the underlying infrastructure to actually carry that digital journey, where there needs to be an infrastructure, there needs to be greater fiberization. That's something that, in fact, the IT Minister and the Telecom Minister, Mr. Vaishnav, said that we're looking for fiberization of towers from the current 35% level to 70% levels, and that is what will serve as perhaps the fulcrum of this digital journey going forward. If I may come to you, this Ms. Mariwala, that as far as this journey is concerned, you've mentioned you're an early stage investor. You're looking at a lot of entities that are working on the ground. You're looking at a whole host of challenges that they may be facing. Can you give us a sense? This was one aspect that Professor pointed out for us, that one, of course, from a governmental standpoint, needs to establish the infrastructure for carrying this journey forward. But if you can give us, from your perspective, your experiences, the areas in which you've invested, the companies that you're looking at, what are the challenges that they've identified, as a part of carrying this journey? You've mentioned that when you talk about e-commerce, largely urban. When you talk about e-retail, again, largely urban. What are the challenges that some of these early stage companies, in your experience, are facing in carrying this digital journey forward to Bharat, to rural India?
No, when we look at the statistics, Bharat is really what all the early stage VCs are talking about, because that is with data in their hands, with the internet access, that's unleashed a huge opportunity. Um, One of the challenges is when you enable a rural user with the smartphone and connective, assuming also that the connectivity, which is by and large improved drastically in the last 2 years, there is still a challenge of usage, and there is a challenge of trust. So while we are, the India stack has been amazing in terms of giving UPI access, and now as I sit here, I can pay my fruit vendor, and I can pay somebody, in rural India or anywhere else. Um, there is still the adoption at scale has to happen, and that's largely because of trust. Another big issue is that when most of my companies, and I'm talking about agri, financial services companies who are also looking at Bharat, and like I said, technology companies which are using the workforce in rural India now for a lot of remote work related technology. The key challenge is on the local language apps. There are a lot of tools available, but it is still a bit of a challenge to get everything in the local language, because we have a lot. The base layer is obviously not in vernaculars. So we have a lot of in fact, we funded 3 companies in the space of localization of content. It's not just translation, right? The Google tools or a lot of the other tools will do a translation, but they do not contextualize. It's difficult to explain by just doing a transliteration. We need to have an added layer of explanation and contextualization, without which we can't just do a cookie cutter. For example, if you have to explain a loan product to a person in rural India versus a salaried employee, it's going to be in a very different context. So there's a company in my portfolio called Awaz. They did just contextual translation, and then you have to put a voice layer, because the reading is not going to, we can just do an IVR with a chat. That's not going to happen. They will need voice. So we need the right, we don't need just technology. We need the right technology for that particular segment that we are trying to, and that will unleash. In agriculture, for example, there are lots of companies trying to bypass middlemen or bring content to farmers which will help them in their buying of seeds or giving access to things that they didn't have. Again, for them, we have to convince them, we have to explain to them. So when you are translating knowledge, that's an issue. So the challenge, I think, across board, all my entrepreneurs face on the ground, that it takes a lot longer to get the same kind of output that you would get in a much more digitally savvy consumer set, right? So we as investors have to be more patient. We need to work and support along with people like, and I know Professor in IIT Kanpur Incubator, there are some companies I've looked at. In IIT Delhi also I've looked at. We need to have low homegrown companies who are using tech for India, for Bharat, I would say, right? So we need to have solutions for Bharat, which are going to enable the consumer and the provider in the right way. So we need partnerships. We need to partner with the large companies, but we need to have the innovators from India who are not just copying solutions which have worked elsewhere, but we need our own solutions. And then I think now the pipe is built. We have access, the consumer, rural or even a female consumer or a not so savvy consumer now believes in the power of the phone, simply because they know actually they can't do their business without it. You had mentioned education, that I didn't touch upon, but we saw during COVID how having access, people were studying from the phone, and we developed a lot of relevant content which addresses the Bharat student. not just the student preparing for IIT. With 5G, we can have images, we can have videos, which can not just do K-12, but we can upskill. For example, we can have medical workers trained. And there's a company, Maina Mahila, which is doing exactly this. They are doing deep training in rural India for nurses and for midwives to try to give access to quicker healthcare to them. So I think if the government enables even more maybe research grants or maybe support for rural businesses which are looking at Bharat, and also promote some more research into technology which will enable this more, particularly local languages and contextual technologies. I think we as investors are very excited to incorporate Bharat in our thesis.
Those are some interesting comments from Ms. Mariwala. Government may need to do more to encourage these companies. Maybe look at a PLI. That is something that has been in vogue for the last couple of years. But Mr. Abraham, let me ask you one more question before I go across to the audience and get their thoughts on the subject at hand. Amongst the challenges that are being faced, one, of course, going forward, given that there will be as many as 900 million internet users in India by the year 2025, that naturally suggests, as Ms. Mariwala was pointing out, that there will be an incredible amount of data that will be generated. Also importantly, talking about data protection, how important is it that when we go ahead, when we have a user in Bharat whom perhaps may not be as well informed as the user in perhaps urban areas, to have a data security, a data protection framework that shields the user in Bharat, in rural India?
Ashmit, you're asking me a question with an obvious answer, I think, across the world, and also clarified by the Puttaswamy judgment by the Indian Supreme Court. It is clear that privacy and therefore data protection is a globally accepted human right. The harms that emerge from privacy infringement can be incredibly severe. Everything from threat to life, to your harm to your body, sort of significant economic harms, etc. So this is something that cannot be ignored. However, the right of privacy, like many other rights, is interdependent and interconnected to other rights, but also in conflict with other rights. The classic conflict is between the right to free speech, the right to transparency, the rights of the disabled. Some of these rights can be in conflict with the right to privacy. In Indian law, you can see almost a beautiful harmonization of these conflicts. So, for example, in the RTI Act, privacy is one of the 12 exceptions. So you have a right to transparency, but then privacy is an exception to the right to transparency. And similarly, in the privacy law, the latest draft of the DPDP, public interest becomes, or transparency that is required because of public interest, becomes the exception to the privacy right. So this is how the governance imperative and the human rights imperative is balanced by our policymakers. And more recently, from the comments from both the senior and junior minister at METI, we see that they have a third optimization requirement. They also want to protect innovation. And that is the way in which the DPDP has been designed according to METI. One way to make sure that regulation remains technologically neutral, and or perhaps I should say there are three ways in which regulation could be made future-proof and technologically neutral. The first route is, of course, to have expansive definitions. And it's very interesting, and experts on the panel will say that if you were to ask the question, is smoke signals covered by the Indian Telecom Act? And the answer to that question would be yes. And that's how well defined that definition is, because it covers everything into several millennia in the past, and then perhaps several millennia into the future would be covered by that definition. The other approach that we see in the DPDP is to have principle-based regulation, where you only establish the high-level principles and then you leave the details to subsidiary or subordinate lawmaking. That's the second approach to make future-proof regulation. And the third approach is to have co-regulation. And that is also an interesting option for policymakers and has been used in the IT Act. If one were to look at Section 43A of the IT Act, the obligation to protect sensitive personal data can be realized in two ways by regulated entities. Either regulated entities should come together as self-regulatory organizations and produce standards for reasonable security measures. After they do that, they have to go to the regulator, MeitY, and get this self-regulatory standard blessed by MeitY. After that, like the GDPR, the self-regulatory standards comes into a space of co-regulation, and then the benefit is the 2 crores of liability that emerges from data breaches. The regulated entity would get immunity from that liability if they have followed their own self-regulatory standard, which has been blessed by MeitY. The option, the fallback, is also designed into Section 43A. If, as a set of regulated entities, you're too lazy, you're not proactive, you've decided not to establish a self-regulatory organization, you have not managed to come up with any standards, then you have to abide by the most onerous security standard on the planet, which is ISO 27001. So India has had a tradition of designing co-regulation into its laws, and one hopes that that tradition will continue to ensure that our regulation, whether it's data protection law or any other type of law, is future-proof and can deal with emerging technologies, including the metaverse. And for those of us who work in the world of standards, we see a similar sort of situation. Today, in the world of standards, we have de facto standards that have emerged from the bottom, and then we have de jure standards that have been established top down. And it is also a critical piece, including for data protection, as I've said before. If standards like OpenXR have participation from Indian government and Indian academia, then the special use cases in India, for example, shared usage of devices, etc., would be addressed in these standard setting forums. We don't have to have a repeat of the 5GI story. The demands made by Indian academics, by Indian stakeholders, by Indian government, that low mobility, large cell use case should be addressed to allow data to be available for rural populations. That was initially ignored by the 3GPP, and later they came around and accepted the Indian requirement and contribution to the standard. And ideally, this should happen earlier rather than later. We shouldn't have to wait for these moments of balkanization or forking of global standards. We should demand our rightful seat at those global tables and make sure that those global standards are designed with Indian use cases also in mind.
Some very interesting thoughts there, Mr. Abraham. Thank you for giving us that clarity. That was an obvious question, but you've given us a very comprehensive answer as to not just the current framework, which is currently under consultation. And as you correctly pointed out, when we had spoken to the ministers as well, both of them were quite confident that the bill that they've put out in the public domain for consultation will help balance the interests of not just data security and privacy, but also innovation. It's up for consultation, it's up for debate. We'll, of course, begin to get a better picture once the bill is finalized and tabled before the parliament. On that note, while I would love to continue this conversation, but let's also get the audience to be able to interact with our distinguished panel. If I can request the audience members, if they have any questions or feedback or thoughts that they would like to share with the panelists, this is the moment where they can perhaps give a few insights or their perspective on this journey into Bharat.
I have a question, Asmit, in case it's permitted. I am sitting on the dais.
No, absolutely, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the moderator and all the three panelists to touch upon very important aspects of taking India, especially Bharat, to the next decade. And it is very important that when we are talking about digital divide, yes, we are talking about rural urban in general, but I think the point which is touched upon by the panelists is about the women, about the disabled, about those people who are living in urban area, but they are not able to utilize the power of internet. I think we have to recognize those aspects very well. Second, about the regulation aspect, which we were discussing in the last moment, is that we have seen that Indian telecom has grown to be the leading, I think the highest number of telephone users in the world because of the positive regulatory environment in the country, which has grown. And this growth has given equal opportunity to all the players in that. Similarly, in the IT also, we have seen that we are growing, I think one of the fastest growing nation in the world. And today when government is working on any kind of bills like data protection bill or security, whatever is happening, the process which is being followed is so good that we open up with the consultation with all the stakeholders, not only one consultation, but multiple consultation. Yesterday also, Honorable Minister has spoken that he has consulted more than 90 stakeholders who are going to implement the IT system in the future. So I personally feel that, yes, what Sunil has talked about, that the regulation has to be future oriented, should be tech neutral and all those things. That I think should be taken care. Now my question is to Professor Abhay Karandikar. Sir, you are a legend in education and especially in digital education. Now, as the digitization is growing and it is reaching to the rural population also very rapidly, what people knows that how to use 4G, how to use 5G through the mobile and all those things, but they are not able to effectively use the power of internet. So we feel that delivering the education, or you can say capacity building, is a must, not only with the people who are implementing the technology, but also to the people who are using it. And that is one of the reason why the cyber attacks are happening today. And the people who are actually you can say the other side of the society, they are getting impacted more than the people who are well informed. So what are your views on building the nation on capacity building to absorb internet as a technology?
No, I 100% agree with you that we need, the capacity building in terms of effective usage of the internet and its applications right up to the last mile, population. You know, we also, need. I mean, of course, in the past few years, a lot of work has been done in terms of making both contents and applications and interfaces available in local languages. In also easy to use, accessible interfaces which can be deciphered by the common man. Although there has been a lot of progress, but I would say that in a country like as diverse as India, both in terms of language and cultural and education skills, a lot more needs to be done in terms of capacity building and also in terms of developing applications and interfaces which are more user friendly and easily accessible. And in fact, that's where there is a lot of opportunity. And in this context, I would also say that it is not just, I would say that in the rural populations, but also, across the country as the complexity of the devices increases and, the plethora of services that you want to access, there is, in fact, a need for even a wider skill building programs, across the populations. I mean, and not just, for the rural India, but maybe even for the urban Indian populations as well. So I think therefore there is a need both in terms of skill building and also in terms of, applications and interfaces to be made available, taking into account the diversity that exists, in our country.
Thank you, Professor.
Do we have any other guests who would like to perhaps get a few thoughts? I think we have a guest there on the panel.
SN Gupta is here in the audience. He is present in person. SN.
Yeah, thank you, Anilji, and thank you, Ashmit, for this opportunity. Actually, a very interesting discussion is happening, but I'll like to make a comment on the infrastructure part, especially the last mile in rural India, as Professor and Madam Paula also pointed out that infrastructure is still lacking. And as we know, out of 250K Gram Panchayat, only 180K have been connected, and that connection is actually not end-to-end. It is middle mile. Middle mile only have to be done, but then there is a distribution or access within the village, and for that we have a great plan or program, PM Wani actually, and that is a great liberalization, everything, and that should have handled this last mile problem, but unfortunately it has not also happened, and that is because of the funding for that middle, the access part, because this VLE we want to create, nobody is funding. And Madam Paula, I think she may have a suggestion or a offer, and that is one thing which is required. According to me, the USO fund should contribute for that mile also, actually, if they can do, and it's just a very meager portion of the other part they are doing, USO fund. The other thing, of course, and this program is only for 250K Gram Panchayat, but 4 lakhs villages are still left. And 2 years back, on the advice of Honorable Prime Minister, the government came out with a program, phase 3, to connect those 4 lakhs villages also with the fiber. But unfortunately, the tender for that is yet to be settled. They have tried different schemes, and the last scheme which was to be tried was the EPC. Earlier they tried PPP, now EPC also. And yesterday only in the media there is a report that minister have told this project should be taken out from the monetization or PPP or something, so it will get delayed. So, and for that, what my suggestion will be, of course, Professor Ravi Krandikar is an expert on the technology. Normally they want to take fiber there actually to all 4 lakhs villages also, like they wanted to do for this 250K. But fiber is not feasible, and that is not the only technology now. Actually, a lot of new technologies have come actually along with the fiber, like LEO satellites are there, then free space optic is there, and then this 5G will bring FWA. So all those things should have been there, but our understanding is government is still going for the fiber only. Actually, according to me, even if they come out with a tender, it should be left to the people who will do the job. Technology neutrality should be put in the tender itself. The option should be given to the people who will deliver that last mile, actually. And so that is what my suggestion. But Professor, I think you can correct me or you can add on this.
You want me to answer this, or?
Yeah, if you have, because
Yeah.
you know about these new technologies.
No. I think, see, I agree that there are multiple possibilities of using technologies, both in terms of radio as well as in terms of fiber. Of course, as you know, that the BharatNet plan is to take fiber up to the Gram Panchayats, but beyond Gram Panchayats, there are like 2 to 3 villages which are scattered around these Gram Panchayats, which also needs to be connected. And multiple possibilities exist there, like point-to-point Wi-Fi link. There is a Wi-Fi. You could in areas where you cannot take the fiber, there is a possibility of providing through satellite connectivity. And I agree that we have to use a combination of the technologies possible, which will actually eventually provide the connectivity. And it's not that we have to take only the fiber route. So yes, I think I agree in that sense. But of course, some of the technologies that you mentioned, like free space optics and so on, they are still, I would say, not at a point where we can provide affordable connectivity in the rural areas. I mean, so as long as the combination of technologies which can provide affordable access, we must, I think, deploy all of them.
Thank you, Professor.
I understand we have.
There are few questions in the audience. First, may I request Dr. Jayjeet Bhattacharya?
Thank you so much. As we, and my question is to the entire panelist, is there are fantastic innovations happening, but it's, as we hurtle towards a decade of the decade for India in that sense, we also see that a lot of people will be thrown under that bus. So we are creating the bullet train in a digital perspective, but we see people who are struggling to get onto it, to use it, and they don't have a choice. They really have to start driving it, but they can't drive it because they have not been trained. Let me take a little example which will amplify what I'm trying to say. And my banker came in yesterday and was discussing the fact that when he opens up an account and the client then says, please help me put in the password. So if I put the password, it'll get compromised and your account will get hacked. And the response is that, well, that means you're doing something wrong a priori, which is why my account will get hacked. Now, the complete understanding of what password is, as simple as that, does not exist. And fortunately, unfortunately, we are accelerating at a tremendous pace towards digitalizing everything, which is a very good thing to do. But for the older generations, it's a challenge. And how do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that we carry everyone forward? Nobody's left behind. Like Sunil was talking about, no language left behind. How do we make sure no person is left behind, especially the senior citizens? And most of the frauds that we see is happening with senior citizens, specifically women senior citizens. And those are data that we have. How do we stop this from happening?
Ashmit, before you begin, there is a hand from IIT Gandhinagar online, and there is also a question from Harish Mistry in the chat. As in, if you could both look at the online, offline, and just a heads up, we have another 9 minutes left.
Sure. So let's first begin with the question that has been raised. Would any one of our panelists prefer taking that in terms of the risks that are posed, especially to those who are not perhaps as well informed, especially elderly, and that they often get trapped in these cases? For example, when he pointed out that even password, the concept of a password, they may not be very familiar. Any one of our panelists would like to take that, Professor?
I think I think the similar question was raised by Anilji earlier, that there is big need for a large scale skill, sort of human capital development need, where, the entire population needs to be educated. But as I already mentioned, that apart from the education, we are I mean, despite tremendous progress has been made, we are still not there in terms of a very user-friendly applications and interfaces to address the diversity that that Chajit and Anilji also spoke about, not from the point of view of multilingual populations, but also multicultural. The way in which we use the everyday devices. And also in terms of populations, whether very young people or very old who are not adapted to technologies. So still there is a lot more needs to be done in terms of developing those applications and interfaces. So for example, the example which Ajit gave about the banker asking the password to be given and password to be pinned in right in front of that banker. In fact, there is a scenario that can be developed for the applications and interface. You don't have to really text that password in front of the banker. I mean, it would be possible to do this and therefore not disclose this. So I think it is also education and skill building is one, but also I think I would say that in terms of technology, the applications and interfaces also needs to be improved to address, and that is a huge gap area in the Indian context, because if you look into the Western world, like in the US, there is so much uniformity in terms of the usage that there is so much standardization is there, and also the language is also the same. We are really very, very different. Every person, if you not only speaks different language, but also uses the device also in a different way. So I think that is where the opportunity.
Ms. Mariwala, you would like to share a few thoughts on that?
Yes, I certainly would. It's a very, very valid point. In rural India, when a lot of our companies use something called assisted commerce, the whole model is, you're using technology, but with assistance. Like many things in India that we do, we have sort of a hybridization, just to compensate for this gap in digital education, or as digital transformation is happening. So that is one. But I think the other point is, if we have technologies which which will take away some of the need to really understand very deep, very complex aspects. Particularly, I think if we have face recognitions, fingerprinting, and some of this has come in KYCs and so on. So even seniors are able to understand that it's unique to me, and I'm not exposing myself to such frauds, for example. The other very important aspect is for the disabled. I think those who are visually challenged, or have other disabilities. I think a lot of banks have taken note and have come up with applications, not the best ones, to addressing this particular segment as well. Because imagine if you cannot see, or if you cannot hear, how do you use some of these technologies? So I think there is definite need to put in various layers of in between the user interfaces to ensure security and ease and comfort.
Sure. On that note, let's also reach out to IIT Gandhinagar. They've raised their hand. They've been waiting patiently. If you can hear us, the question that you would like to pose, your name, and the panelists that you would like to address the question to.
Thanks, Ashmita. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you're very audible. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashmit. So this is Professor Mayank from IIT Gandhinagar. So I am a kind of a pure linguist, so I will ask a more kind of a technical question here. So my question is the following, that in the recent, maybe last 5-6 years, there has been tremendous innovation in the deep learning, and because of which we can create a lot of high performing translation systems that can translate one language to other, and same we are trying to kind of replicate it for other Indic languages. But again, if you see the kind of the way we speak languages, the way we are using multiple languages is it's kind of very different. So we are kind of mixing a lot of languages together. For example, we are mixing Hindi with English, right? And again, it depends on kind of proficiency with which you speak Hindi. That is kind of a different than the way you are proficient in English, right? Again, there is no such standards where you mix the languages together. There are no such grammatical rules, the semantics and the syntax in which you mix different languages together. So I just wanted to hear from the panel, like, what are your views on this? And one of the major challenge here is, or the kind of data that we as Indians are generating here is like the again, these are as per the recent estimates that the people who are mixing languages, they are almost overtaking the people who are speaking in the native languages. So the data being generated in these languages is actually huge. That's all from our side. Thank you.
One of our panelists prefer taking that question from IIT Gandhinagar.
I think the question has crossed the limits of my expertise when it comes to AI models. I would sort of point to the critique of large language models. The standard critique from academics is that large language models are stochastic parrots. And all they are really doing is extrapolating into the future. And therefore, that is why many of the models, including the models released by Meta, for example, OTP 175B, which is our open source large language model for English, and also BlenderBot 3, which is built on top of OPT 175B. That's a chat project. Both when in the scientific papers that accompany these models, we have made it very clear that these models will hallucinate. And that is talking to the same concern, that these are basically stochastic parrots. They don't really understand what they are doing. Another project that we have released is Cicero. Cicero, again, an open source project, helps you play the game diplomacy, where multiple players can sort of cooperate and compete with each other to win battles in this sort of game. And that is perhaps the future, as some AI experts are pointing out. You don't leave everything to the large language model. Over the large language model, you add additional logic and reasoning and decision making and strategy and so on. And I think while this year was marked by large language models, in the coming years, we might have these hybrid models emerging, which can then deal with the difficulty that you're talking about, where a single speaker will shuttle back and forth between multiple languages. And that's where I'm sort of hopeful.
Right. So with that, I'd like to call for a end to this panel discussion. It's been a very interesting conversation. There are still a couple of questions that I wish we could have taken up, but for want of time, I'm afraid I'll have to call for curtains. Interesting conversation, interesting insights from all of our panelists. Professor, of course, told us about the need for building that last mile connectivity, having that kind of access to the very last village is something that's critical for taking this digital journey forward. He also spoke about aspects such as e-healthcare, e-education that are likely to stand out. Ms. Mariwala spoke to us from the wealth of her experience on the challenges that are being faced on the ground. She's, of course, invested in very many companies that are, in fact, working in that direction. And she's pointed towards how perhaps the government maybe needs to play a grandfathering role because the turnaround time is a little longer in some of these rural entities. Mr. Abraham, of course, spoke extensively about how the private sector, Meta specifically, can be an ally of the government in taking this journey forward. And in doing so, he spoke about his very many efforts being done by the company and also spoke about how perhaps there is a need for balancing regulation as well, ensuring that the regulation is a little ahead of the curve in terms of allowing that sphere of influence in terms of innovation. I beg your pardon. But that is unfortunately all the time that we have. I'd like to thank all of our panelists once again for sharing their time with us and for sharing their insights, and for in fact, this platform as well that allowed for this interesting exchange of thoughts and ideas. We hope to connect once again and hope to carry this conversation forward. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thanks.